Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to episode number 104 of the White Knuckle Podcast, powered by Ozonics. Undetectable, undeniable. Well, hey, welcome to the show, Wes. Today we are joined by Mr. Wes Delks. Did I get your last name right, Wes?
That's it.
All right. Awesome. And Wes is one of the partners and general manager of Real World Wildlife Products. You know, Wes, one of the things that I mentioned to you earlier before we recorded earlier today was that I was curious how you ever got involved in Real World and I guess how you got involved in the whole, the food plot business, period. What led you down this road?
Yeah, I could answer that question a couple different ways, I guess. Kind of a long story, but I guess it all kind of starts with how I got to know Don Higgins, the other co-owner of Real World Wildlife Products. And growing up, I loved deer hunting and always wanted to do something in the outdoor industry, and always wanted to write hunting articles. And I mean, I'd read from different magazines and really liked the stuff that I'd read from Don and really respected his articles and his opinions on stuff. And as I got older, I went to Purdue in wildlife management. I just every day became more passionate about deer hunting and owned some captive deer as well. And actually my mother-in-law, for a Christmas present one year, arranged for Don and I to have dinner together. And I met Don, and my dad is in career services, and he says it's not always what you know, but who you know. And one thing as a deer hunter is I've always wanted to surround myself with people that were much better hunters than myself. And so I took that opportunity of getting to meet, in my opinion, the best deer hunter in the world, and took that opportunity to foster that relationship. And I previously worked in seed testing with Indiana Crop Improvement, and anytime I would be on business over in Don's neck of the woods, I'd make sure to stop by and go out for lunch or just stop by and talk about deer hunting or whatever. And Don and I kind of got to know each other over probably 4 or 5 years, and this opportunity presented itself, and I jumped at the chance.
So you were able to find a way essentially to mix in your love of hunting with a career, really. And I would imagine if it's anything like any other career that involves one of your passions, it no longer becomes a 5-day-a-week thing. Exactly.
Yep. I'm very blessed, to say the least, that every day I'm doing something I love. I'm talking with people that love the same stuff that I do. But there's a lot of people that think about whitetails 365 days a year, but really there's very, very few that do something about it 365 days a year. And if you really are, it comes down to what you're willing to sacrifice, I guess, is, are you willing to move? Are you willing to change jobs? Are you willing to, what are we willing to do to make our passion of chasing whitetails a full-time thing? And I'm very blessed to have the opportunity to do what I'm doing.
I would agree. I sort of landed in the same position myself. It wasn't really by design; it just happened that way, and it is definitely a passion, and it's I equally feel as blessed to be doing what I'm doing. So I can completely identify with that. Well, let's talk a little bit about food plots, which it sounds like you have quite a bit of knowledge based on your previous experience with. Was it the state of Indiana, or was it a university?
So every state, particularly in the Midwest, has a crop improvement or seed improvement, and Indiana Crop Improvement grew out of the Indiana Corn Growers Association, and that's been around for over 100 years. And what the goal is and the Indiana Crop Improvement came out of, or the Indiana Corn Growers Association came out of the Purdue Agronomy Department. And Purdue's a very, very well-known agriculture school. And the purpose of those crop improvements is kind of like the name implies, is to help seed companies make sure that they have the best products possible. And the major way that they do that is to provide germination tests.
Okay. So what does a germination test tell you?
So, good question. That's something that we work to educate our end customers every day with, is to help people in reading seed tags. And every single bag of seed, whether it's a bag of turf seed or a bag of corn seed, is required by law to have certain information on it. And a couple of those things would be the germination rate and the inert matter. And that's one thing that we strive at Real World to do, is help them understand what those things mean and how to read them. And the germination rates, if you open up, or if you look on the side of a bag of seed and look at those rates, it may say 80% or 85% or 95%. And what that's saying is, out of 100 seeds, how many seeds are viable seeds that are going to germinate and produce a healthy plant. And Real World has always strives to produce in our bags of seed is the very best germination rates possible. Gotcha.
And obviously that's really important if you want something to grow, right?
Exactly. Everybody, is quick to blame the bag of seed for a crop failure, but if you're doing germination tests, then we can go back to our test and say, hey, we've done the testing. We know that 95% of our seed is viable, good seed. So we're providing you the best seed possible.
Right. So is that something that is pretty much standard across the board for all of your stuff as well?
Yes. Whenever we buy seed, that's definitely something that we're looking at, is if it doesn't have good enough germination rates, then we don't want that product. And if the germination rates go beneath a certain percentage, then we're not going to sell that product either.
Gotcha. Makes sense. What other kind of testing do you guys do that sort of helps ensure success?
So that's a little bit, goes back to a little bit of my days at Indiana Crop Improvement. Is at Indiana Crop Improvement, I was doing different tests for various seed companies that were either side-by-side trials or testing new products, or looking at certain varieties, or hey, we want to plant a annual screen, and we want to see that screen with this in it, and we want it side by side with a screen with this in it, and looking just at different mixes, what one particular crop in that mix does, certain varieties. And that's something that now that I'm at Real World, that I will continue to do those types of things, and obviously get to put it to practice as to what the results are in being able to sell those products. So Real World's a company that over the past decade has, in in my opinion, the best products available on the food plot market. And they've accomplished that by putting by their varietal selection. By the Ladino clover that's in Real World isn't just any Ladino clover. It was a Ladino clover that was best for whitetails, and the chicory was, and Austrian pea was, and so on and so forth. And we'll continue to do that, particularly as we'd love to come out with a couple new products here in coming years, but we won't release those until we're confident that it's a product that's different than what's already out there, and that it's a premium product.
Okay. So I think what you're saying is all seeds are not created equal.
Correct. They sure aren't.
Okay. What makes the difference? So here's a great example. I had a question last night. I was out, and you and I touched briefly on this, I think, this morning, when we spoke, and that was, I had a fella that I was showing some property to, and a large part of that property is just wide open. So he has kind of a blank canvas. At first he was concerned with that, and I said, you really don't, 200 acres of timber that's, a thick, snarly mess with some food plots on it is a perfect situation, but very few of those exist, especially in my world. If they are, people generally aren't selling them. But at any rate, I had spoken with him about your product, and it was bedding in a bag, and I believe that's got Indian grass, big blue stem, and switchgrass, if memory serves me correctly.
Correct.
Correct. His question to me was, why can't I just go buy all that stuff myself? It's cheaper. And I said, I really can't speak to that, but my guess is they've thought of that, and I think you answered the question by saying all seeds are not created equal. So if you can just one more time go over what it would be, particularly with respect to that, or Ladino clover, or Egyptian wheat, what makes it different or better?
Yeah, we'll take the native grass example and just elaborate on that a little bit. But just like a farmer knows that every variety of corn is different. I mean, there's people that are planting 1,000 acres of corn and soybeans in the Midwest, and they're very particular about which varieties they use, and they have favorite varieties and varieties that they may use in certain scenarios and not in others. And what Real World has done, and I would take this example back to your guy that's getting ready to plant native grasses, is when we selected the switchgrass that's in our blend, it was side by side with dozens of different switchgrass varieties. And that variety of switchgrass is the most winter standable variety of switchgrass on the market. And in comparison to all the other switchgrasses that are sold, if you go back to that particular variety in February, March, that's the true test of how good a variety of switchgrass is for a habitat manager or a deer hunter. Is we want year-round bedding cover. And that variety of switchgrass, the Real World variety, for the first time ever, sold out this year. And that is because people are seeing just how different our switchgrass is from the competition. And if you put it side by side with another switchgrass, we're confident that the results will speak for themselves when you see just how winter standable ours is in February, March, once it's been through wind and snow for winter, and it's still providing the bedding cover and still standing 6, 7, 8 foot tall.
Right, and therein lies the biggest difference. It's it's kind of like maybe this is a bad comparison, but I came from the car business, and a tire is not a tire is not a tire is not a tire. I've got tires on my truck that lasted nearly 70,000 miles. They're 10-ply tires. There's also tires that could be the same specs and measurements, and they're not going to last that many miles because they're just not the same quality. They're tires, they're made out of rubber. They do the same job. They may not do it as long, and they may not stand up as well. And I think that would be a good analogy. And it makes complete sense. You could buy Indian grass, for instance, off of, I'm sure, Amazon or God only knows where, or big blue stem or switchgrass for that matter, off all three of those varieties off of, anywhere on the internet.
Yeah.
And you just, you may be able to duplicate eventually what you guys have, but it's going to end up costing you the same, if not more money. That's just a fact.
Yep, we're buying it. I mean, we're doing such things in such bulk that we can provide it to people and cheaper than they would able to do it themselves. And in addition, we're saving them years and years of testing of. If somebody wants to go out and plant, all of these crops side by side and do the varietal selection for themselves, I just can't imagine how much time and effort and money would be put into doing something like that.
Yeah. Gotcha. So how, as long as we're on that, as long as we've gone down that rabbit trail, how viable is it to believe that, I believe the most you sell it in is a 35-pound bag, that does about 5 acres. How viable is it to think that, you're going to have, again, provided all things are equal, and let's assume that we've done everything prior to that, you needed to, and tested the soil and did all the things that you guys would recommend. How likely is it that you're going to have deer using that for cover in the first year?
Oh, if you do everything right, you're definitely going to have your bedding bag or your switchgrass will be at least 5-6 foot tall. You will have bedding cover that first year. In the second year, it's going to look even better. But it is a product that you can plant and plan on having bedding habitat that year.
Awesome. Okay. Well, I wanted to make sure I wasn't misleading anybody. It definitely is. It's definitely fun to look at things on a blank canvas and be able to plan, which is often what we're doing.
Yeah.
I
would definitely, if I was your customer that was looking at that blank canvas, I would rather have a blank canvas of a field than the canvas of timber. In looking to buy property, it's all about how a property lays out, right?
Right.
If you've got a square property and all 4 of those sides touch timbering property, you've got to deal with a lot of neighboring pressure. But if you've got a property in that same square and one side's a road, one side's a river, and 2 sides are field edge, and you've got that square to manage yourself, it's a lot easier. One thing that I've really picked up from Don is that he looks for properties that hunting pressure is going to help his property, not hurt his property. And you have to look at the layout of a property to see if the property is that type of property.
Sure. So let's just go off on that for just a minute. How is it that you guys would go about consulting someone on what to plant? In my part of the world, there's going to be corn and beans everywhere. There's not going to be turnips. There's not going to be, things of that nature, but there's going to be corn and beans everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
How is it that you guys determine, what goes where?
Yep. That's a question that I get just about every day, if not multiple times a week. People call into the office or shoot me an email and say, what's your best product, or what food plot should I plant? And obviously that's not a one size fits all where I can just respond with one generic answer. I got to have some follow-up questions and figure out, well, how many acres are you planting, and are you wanting to plant in the spring or the fall? Are you willing to do some maintenance? So there's a laundry list of questions that you got to respond to. What should I plant? But in its basic form, if I've got enough acreage, I love planting Real World's Generation 2 soybeans. And if I've got a smaller plot, then I think our clover chicory is highly underutilized, and it is the best clover product on the market.
Yeah, I planted. I got kind of lucky this year. On my lease, they cleared out a bunch of let's just call it the edge of the timber, and it opened up some real small areas for food plots. So half of them I put into clover and chicory, and that's growing well. And as a matter of fact, I was just checking my cameras yesterday evening with that client that I was walking the property with, and there was turkeys all over that clover already. Let me ask a couple other questions, and I think they're often myths about food plots, and one of them that I hear all the time, and even in contemplating when to do this show is are we too late? Well, this year it happens that we're definitely not too late, because everybody's just starting to dry out, at least in this part of the world. But
things have been pretty soggy this year.
Yeah. Do you have to plant in the spring?
By no means. We probably, soybeans is our biggest seller. We sell a lot of our Generation 2 soybeans and our northern soybeans to people that are in northern states, but don't have to plant in the spring. We have a lot of fall options as well. Our harvest salad and our plot topper would be our two best fall sellers, and there's a lot of cereal grains and brassicas in those products. Mm-hmm. So that's a great option for guys that are that missed their spring planting window.
Sure. Is there any value to planting beans in the middle of July, under the pretense that the leaves are going to be green longer, assuming you don't have a hellacious freeze in the middle of September?
Yep. Now that's an interesting question, and something that I've debated with several different people on when's the best time to plant soybeans in certain situations. And it really depends on what the guy is wanting to do. So, and what I mean by that is our soybean product has 4 different varieties in it that have different maturity rates. In the ag world, they use the term natural senescence. And natural senescence just means that time period in which they go from a green leafy stage to being dried down. And with having 4 different beans in our product that have different maturity rates, that natural senescence period is obviously a longer period than a normal ag bean. And that can be helpful. And a perfect example of that is Kyle Harmon from Team Radical was chasing a deer several years ago that he called Kick It In, and it was like a 196-inch deer. And if you watch the video of that hunt into October, those beans were still green and yellowing down, and that buck was doing what he'd been doing in the summer. And so if you're looking to get a crack at a deer that's on a summer pattern, or that's doing what he's been doing in the summer, then I like to plant a little bit later. If you're thinking, well, this plot really is just a late season plot, or just a plot that I'm not going to hunt until the rut, or if you know that, it depends on what the intention of that plot is. But if you know you're not intending to hunt it on the early season, then I would tend to plant that as early as possible, so it can go to that completely mature stage where they're really focused more on the grains than the leafy part of the plant as quickly as possible. Did that make sense?
Yeah, 100%. So
okay, yeah.
Really there isn't a one-size-fits-all. What it boils down to is your goal.
Exactly. Yep.
How about the statement that you need a lot of acres to grow a food plot? In other words, a half acre, 1 acre, whatever. Is, in your opinion, is that enough to make a difference?
It's totally dependent on deer pressure. I've planted a half acre of soybeans myself before that was out in the middle of ag country along a 10-acre woods where I knew might have been just a handful of does, and I was chasing a specific buck. And that half acre of soybeans did exactly what I wanted it to do. It was holding deer and feeding deer well into the late season, and I still had beans and pods, and it never got overbrowsed. With that being said, that's a rare instance. A lot of people that are planting food plots are putting them in places where there are higher deer numbers, and we get reports of people, pro staff and people that we sponsor included, that plant 3-4 acres, and it's not enough. It's not enough to even get the plants to the point where they're producing pods, because they have so many deer. So it's entirely dependent on the deer density.
Okay.
If you do have a high deer density area, I really like a food plot like clover that can take a beating and just, as deer browsing, just keeps coming back.
What are your thoughts on planting, maybe soybeans early, and then going over that with Deadly Dozen in August or July? John would say August. I'm gonna say every time I planted in August in Wisconsin, I get burned.
Yeah.
But what are your thoughts on something like that? They're going to grow. They're not going to grow at the rate that they probably would,
right?
If they're planted alone. But what are your thoughts on doing something like that?
Yeah, I love having greens and grains in the same plot. That keeps the guessing game in late season, where in December it seems like if it's warmer than normal, then you can bet on them going to greens, where if it's colder than normal, then they're going after that high protein source and going to a grain food source. So it's nice to have greens and grains in the same plot. In my personal experience, I've had a lot better luck with cereal grains being overseeded into soybean plots, and just using something like oats, and just going, instead of using the Deadly, I just haven't seen brassicas, and there's a lot of people that do it with success, but I've had cereal grains like oats do a lot better job for me in having a green food source in a grain soybean plot as far as overseeding.
Okay, so it's something that you've done in the past?
Yep, I have, and have had pretty good results with it.
What's your favorite thing to do? I mean, not just overall, but I mean, what's your favorite thing to plant? I mean, have you had a better experience with one thing over another? I mean, I know that when I planted back before they had Deadly Dozen, when I planted Plot Topper, I mean, I had just about an acre, and it just was absolute dynamite. The problem was, and this is where Don would get me, I planted it too early, and like the deer just disintegrated it in the end of August, the start of September. Our season opens right around the 15th of September, and by then they didn't use it again until November, late November into December. into January, February, March. It was a great turkey plot in the spring because there was still some food value there left for them when the snow melted. But
right.
Go ahead.
I would say my favorite food. I mean, if I had to put it on one thing, I really like having the greens and the grain in the same plot by doing a soybean plot with putting 4 goats in it. That's what personally has worked best for me. And one thing you'll hear people say that really are hunting a specific buck. I mean, there's a lot of people that have had good success during the rut, but if you're hunting one specific buck, then it seems like those types of hunters that are focusing on one deer have better luck patterning a deer when they're hitting food sources, and that's either early season or late season, when you can really know that deer is doing a certain particular thing, and he's bedding in this area and going to this food source. And I just don't think there's a better product out there to hit both that early season and late season attraction than putting soybeans and oats in the same plot.
Gotcha. You know, there isn't a whole lot of people that spend a whole lot of time talking about screening on plots. And I'm just curious to hear, I'm seeing more and more products out there, but I'm curious to hear your take on a screen for a plot. How much value do you see in it? Is it worth the extra money? I guess, and it is a little bit dependent on the situation. I get that. Yep. But overall, what are you seeing? Okay.
Definitely property dependent, depending on what you're trying to do. If it's a large enough area, I mean, if the swath of area you're wanting to use as a screen is large enough, then you can plant something like our native grasses that come back year after year. However, there's definitely people out there where they need an annual screen, something that is quick, easy, and they don't mind planting it year after year. It seems like there's more and more products like that, and it's something that Real World's looking into is what's a product that can beat what's already out there. I personally, on my own property, am planning. It's really a 3-tiered screen right now. The first row of my screen is it's bushes that are. It's got some. I'll probably take some flack for this, but there's some invasive species that I'm using as part of my screen, as well as some cedar trees. I'm really just trying to create that first row is going to be my long-term plan for creating a screen that will be there forever. That second tier to my screen, I've planted Miscanthus gigantus rhizomes. And then the third tier to my screen is I'll have an annual screen just from testing some product and looking at different mixtures as to what screening works best. But the screen that I'm using is doing what a lot of people are probably using their annual screens for, and it's just to keep deer feeling comfortable from there's a road about 300 yards away, and with that annual screen, the deer will feel more comfortable feeding in that plot. And then it also helps to create an edge through that plot, and if they walk that edge, they'll ultimately end up walking within a chip shot from my stand.
Gotcha. Okay. I'm just trying to think. I had a bunch of other questions that I wanted to ask. I guess one of the things that I hear a lot of people get concerned about is having this made-for-TV food plot that is weed-free and just, looks the part, so to speak. How important is that in its overall palatability, if that's the right word, to a deer?
Yeah, a pretty plot is nice, but I've definitely had soybean plots, or I'd had various plots that had a lot of different weeds in them, and and it's pretty discouraging as a food plotter when you're sitting there watching a doe, and the first thing she walks out is eats on is common ragweed that's coming out in the middle of your plot. But hey, if the deer are eating it, then I mean, who are we to try and deter them from doing that? So I'm by no means looking for that picture perfect TV looking plot. I'm looking for a plot that's going to do the job, that's going to attract deer, and if it's got some weeds in it, then I'm not too worried about it at all.
Gotcha. Perfect. And that sort of leads into my next question. Does the dirt have anything to do with that?
Does the dirt?
Does the dirt have anything to do with that? With the amount of weeds?
You mean like the soil type?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, do you need great dirt and great soil for a good plot? Obviously, it helps.
Obviously, I mean, we recommend people to do a soil test, and I mean, make sure that your fertilizer's on at the right rates. But it does seem like there's certain scenarios where somebody plants a plot that didn't do a soil test, hasn't done a lot of fertilizer, but they just have great soils, and just by accident have this great plot.
Okay. How? This is probably a dumb question, but I'll ask it anyway because I'm known to ask dumb questions. How much of a necessity is a soil sample? Like, I know everybody's going to say, yeah, you need to do it, but if you don't do it, are you just wasting your money?
I mean, you may get lucky and have a great plot, but personally, it's not something that I want to risk. If I'm going to put the seed and herbicide cost into the plot, why not spend $10-15 and figure out exactly what kind of herbicide I can put on that plot to make it the very best one possible.
Gotcha. In terms of equipment, for planting these plots, you know, there's a lot of misconceptions about stuff like that, and that you need just tons of equipment. And for a lot of what we're all going to be planting, the depth that you're putting these seeds in the soil isn't that big, so it doesn't necessarily take a ton of equipment. Is that an accurate statement?
Definitely. We have all experience levels and all equipment types. I mean, even there's guys that find some way to scratch the surface and broadcast the seed and then run over it with a pallet. Or, I mean, there's all equipment types that, and ultimately at the end of the day, if you're able to get some deer traction, then I mean, it's better than nothing. But we've got a product that could work for everybody, depending on what your equipment limitations are.
Gotcha. A couple other questions, and I know I've taken a bunch of your time already, but one thing that we haven't talked about is fertilizing or lime. How important is that? And I know some of it's going to be dependent upon the type of soil that you're working with, but with respect particularly to fertilizer, how important is that, and how much of a necessity is it? And is missing that step a big mistake?
I definitely think it's critical with crops like clover to make sure your pH is right, to get your clover right. That's a product that when you plant it, you're looking for it to be productive for you for years to come. And if you don't get your fertilizer right on harvest salad, well, you got the next year to try something different. But when you're planting something that you're planning on like a native grass or clover, something that you're planning on years to come being a productive plot, you definitely want to make sure that your fertilizer and pH is on point.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I think one of the biggest problems with food plotting, or one of the things that I see people, especially in the business that I'm in and selling land now, is they just sit and overthink it, and then by overthinking it, they've essentially left themselves without enough time really to do it properly, and end up doing the job halfway or 3/4 of the way. How much thought, other than figuring out a good location, really needs to be put into a food plot? Again, I know that the soil test is a must. But should a person really sit there and really spend a ton of time thinking about what to plant or how to plant it, or things like that it seems like a lot of people, or I guess one of the things that I see is a lot of people getting stuck on that. Geez, I'm just not sure what to plant. I'm not sure, there's bean and corn right next door, so I really don't need to plant beans or corn. Well, that's not altogether necessarily true. And well, there's clover right there, so there's no planting, or there's alfalfa right there, so there's no point in planting clover. Are any of those things true?
Yeah, definitely. That you need to take into consideration what's next door to you, but more importantly, if you've got corn and soybeans planted right next door to you, those crops are going to be taken out at harvest October time frame. And after those crops are out, if you've got a food source that's still standing, that's got a lot more tonnage per acre, you can put your plot in the right spot and have a plot that's the deer are coming to where you want it. And that really is probably more than any other plot question, is the most important in my mind, is the location of that plot. And I've been to several properties where they were putting either too many food plots out, or they were putting plots in what I thought were the wrong locations, where they weren't huntable food plots. And the locations of those food plots are just key into making a property successful or not successful. And people are relatively pretty good at having a property that can attract deer, but being a property that is attractive to deer and huntable are two separate things. And that's really where food plot location comes in. Figuring out how you can put the location of those plots on properties in a way that you can access them, hunt them without being detected, without putting unnecessary pressure on your deer, and putting them in places where if they're attracted to one part of the property, you set up your stand maybe on a funnel as they go to a pinch point leading out to that food plot, or not always hunting the plot maybe as most people would, but in a way that the location can be beneficial to both you and to a buck that is accessing that plot as well.
Gotcha. Any final thoughts before I let you go and get back to work? Do something that's gonna make you some money.
One more idea out there. Okay. I'm gonna throw one more idea out there, Jason, if that's okay.
Yeah, go for
it.
And
it's I just kind of wanted to give a shout out to Don. I've learned a lot from Don and the way that he hunts deer, but there's a lot of different people out there that are successful at killing big bucks, and some of them are doing it in very different ways from each other. And I just think of in the time that I've spent writing articles for different deer magazines, I've got to interview different people that were successful at killing big deer by either hunting just on public ground or hunting one specific farm that was a 700-acre family farm, or going strictly to urban ground and knocking on door after door and getting permission to a lot of different properties. And there's a lot of different ways that people can be successful at killing big deer. And I think that it's important to surround yourself with people that are better at killing big bucks and glean from what they're doing, and develop a system that works well for you.
Well, there you have it. My conversation with Mr. Wes Delks from Real World Wildlife Products. I don't think I could have found a more fitting way to end the show than Wes's words. I guess with that, I'll begin to close out the show for today. I want to thank Ozonics, our partner in this venture, and I want to thank all of you, our loyal listeners. We haven't had a ton of shows lately. Things have been a little bit crazy, starting this new real estate gig, etc. But we've got a full schedule coming up. So if you have any wants or needs or desires for a show, please don't hesitate to reach out to me and let me know. Jason at whiteknuckleproductions.com. And I'll do my best to get the guests that you want on the show out here talking about what you like to hear. So with that, thanks again for listening. Jason out.